Good afternoon. Welcome to Senate Education on Tuesday, January 23rd. 2:10, we are starting after the governor's budget address, and we have Mr. Michael O'Grady in talking about the Agency of Natural Resources proposed rule on PCBs. And we also have with us Mr. Matt Chapman, who is with the Agency of Natural Resources, so he could answer questions as well. We have Mr. O'Grady has to be somewhere at 2:45. So with that, the floor is yours.
This is Mike O'Grady with Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm just going to provide some background, refresh your memory. As you may all remember, maybe too clearly, the state is requiring schools to test their indoor air quality for PCBs. As part of that requirement, the agency acting under 3 VSA 2810 adopted a Vermont Department of Health advisory level as their interim standard for testing. And so you see on the screen that authority 3 VSA 2810. That authority is only good for 2 years once it's been adopted. And that's important because the memorandum under which the agency adopted the Department of Health standard was issued in effectively February 2nd, 2022. So that interim standard setting the action levels for testing of indoor air quality for PCBs in schools is scheduled to expire February 2nd, 2022. To make those standards more permanent, the agency has proposed amendments to the investigation and remediation of contaminated properties rule. Now, this rule is not solely about PCBs. It's about when there's a hazardous material that's released on your property and what you have to do in order to respond, investigate, and correct the release of that hazardous material on your property. PCBs are a hazardous material. One of the things that did change previously is that the General Assembly, changed what a release is for the purposes of PCBs in schools. You'll see in that subdivision 17, you said release also means the intentional or unintentional action or omission resulting in the spilling, leaking, emission, or disposal of PCBs from building materials in public schools and approved and recognized independent schools. So why is that important? Because when you are in the I rule, what people informally call the investigation and remediation of contaminated properties rule, when you are subject to the I rule, you're subject to all of the requirements for response, correction, and remediation when there is a release of a hazardous material. Since you have changed the definition of release to include that off-gassing emission of PCBs in schools, you are triggering the I rule for schools, which is ultimately what needed to be done if you were going to continue PCB testing in schools. Because remember, those interim medium standards are only going to be valid for 2 years from their adoption. So that's what the I rule does. What the agency is proposing does. I thought I had it. Well, I don't know. I must have closed something. I'm sorry. What the I rule is going to do is it's going to make the school action levels for PCB emissions for releases permanent. Let me see if I can get there quickly. It's a very packet. It's not the longest packet, but it still requires. Try to find it. So there are appendices to the I rule where the action levels for the various hazardous materials are listed. As you will see that the action level for schools, PCBs in schools, is set at what the action levels are for the testing program that's currently going on in schools. They look a little different because they use a different standard of measurement, but it ultimately converts to the same standard.
Correct.
And so that's what this rule is doing. It is formalizing the school action levels for response to a hazardous material release of PCBs and what a property owner needs to do to respond, investigate, and correct. Now, you have all heard from schools, I imagine, about how the PCB testing is affecting them and affecting their planning and affecting their budgets. Well, the House Committee on Education has been hearing that too. And one of the things that they are concerned about is the economic impact analysis in the I rule. So the Administrative Procedure Act requires every rule that is being proposed to include an economic impact analysis on how that rule will affect schools. And specifically, find that economic impact analysis is supposed to address the substantial economic impact of the rule on local school districts. And if it doesn't, then LCAR has the ability to object to that rule and require, well, basically what happens is LCAR objects to the rule because of its economic impact analysis. The agency then has 14 days to correct the economic impact analysis. If they don't, then the LCAR is authorized to object to the rule for failing to recognize the substantial economic impact of the rule to school districts. So your committee or the General Assembly's committee, House Committee on Education, is proposing that LCAR object to the economic impact analysis in the I rule because it does not adequately address all of the costs of PCB testing to schools, all the economic impact that it would have. Specifically, there has been enough experience in the program, ANR's testing program to date, for ANR to provide significant details as to how PCB investigation and mitigation can affect the operation of schools. The economic impact and cost of addressing requirements of schools testing above the PCB action level is indeed hard to quantify because this program was created by the administration without having conducted those estimates prior to implementation. However, at this time, the program has identified enough schools testing above the action level and is creating enough corrective action plans to have enough information to provide a more detailed analysis of the cost to schools of PCB investigation and mitigation. In short, proposal in the I rule to make the PCB action levels permanent deserves more than there will likely be costs borne by schools as the sum total of ANR's analysis.
10 weeks.
Is this letter up on our site?
Yes.
No, I was just gonna ask if you could stop scrolling for a second, because you were trying to read and.
Senator Hashim.
Is the economic impact analysis also available on our committee page or where find that?
I don't know if it's on your committee page. I think it is, it's definitely on LCAR's committee page. And I can find it for you.
While you're doing that, so they're objecting. Are they objecting to formalizing the school action levels altogether, based on the uncertainty in I'm just trying to understand the House's letter a little bit.
They are not objecting to the substance of the rule. They
Okay.
had discussions about that, but they determined that they were not going to do that. What they are objecting to is the economic impact analysis as it regards schools, which the APA allows LCAR to do. And so that's what they're
Just
doing.
went by it. It's on page 12.
So here it is really,
Impact.
the largest impact this updated rule will have on schools is the adoption of the indoor air standards for PCBs, which are currently deemed interim standards. These standards were developed by the Vermont Department of Health to be protective of school occupants. The cost to investigate and mitigate PCB impacts will fall on the public education system, but are necessary to protect students and educators from a known carcinogen. In addition, the state has allocated funds towards the investigation and mitigation of PCB impacts, but there will likely be cost borne by schools. And that last sentence effectively is what House Education is objecting to, that is not, in their opinion, sufficient as an analysis of the total impact, total cost to schools of PCB testing, investigation, and response.
So what are they asking for in their letter?
They want a more detailed economic impact analysis.
So they're not looking, just for my clarification, again, this isn't, we're not the science committee per se, they're not looking to change basically what you just said, they are looking for a greater analysis of the educational impacts, the financial impacts.
Yes.
Okay,
And to be clear, it doesn't need to be some Nobel Prize economic laureate kind of analysis. It's what the agency has access to in a reasonable manner to describe the full economic impact of the proposed rule.
my final question, are there any unintended consequences by this letter that somebody might not be thinking about? In other words, what does, if the letter and the essence of the letter, the idea of the letter is adopted, what happens?
So really, there's no real effect of the letter beyond requesting LCAR object. What will have an effect is if there's an objection and what that objection is to. Because as Matt will probably tell you later, in the part of the I rule where the action levels are authorized,
Yeah.
it says that if an action level is not specifically authorized in the rule, then it defaults to the EPA action level. And the EPA action level is much lower than what has been set as a school action level in the I rule appendix. So Matt's probably going to tell you that the rule is objected to, and specifically the school action level for PCBs, then you're going to have actually a more stringent standard underneath the default I rule.
Right, so more schools would be tested, more schools.
The more schools would trigger the action.
Got it. Okay. It's helpful, please.
Can you, what's the LCAR number? Can you go right back to the very top, so the upper right?
The
Very top right corner, there's an LCAR.
number for the rule.
Yeah, because I'll be seeing this clear.
Russ, do you want?
Top page.
So
Right there. upper-
23-E42. So that's the essence of, I think, why I'm here.
I just thought it'd be good to see it since I'm not in natural anymore, but I
Yeah,
don't need a reason, I guess.
So are we both, sorry,
Yeah, please.
are we both taking a vote or?
Today we're just getting a sense of this, of what the situation is. I'm guessing, and I could be wrong, but people I would think would be, based on the conversation, concerned. Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this might just be misinterpreting, I think this committee generally has been concerned with making the action level too stringent and therefore pushing people into remediation. So, is that accurate?
It is for me, I can't speak for anyone else.
Please.
Sounds like to me that they're anticipating some cost associated with this, and they don't want the school districts to have to,
Well, I think the
Yeah.
point, yeah,
somebody's gonna have to pay.
sure.
I mean, I have an oversimplified mind, but, what I just heard said was that the standard, and they're concerned about teachers and students being exposed to this.
Yeah, I think you're right. They are definitely feeling as though that last sentence around the economic piece and the cost. Too vague, too wide open, definitely. Yes, interesting.
Oh, sorry.
No, I had some principals came to me and said, I want you to stop the testing because. You know, I think we're afraid of what we're gonna find and. We just wanna teach kids, or educate kids, so.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I wish we could get a thorough economic analysis on everything, every single bill that we pass, but that's another conversation. On its face, I can see why there's a hesitancy about this, because it does feel like it's lacking, thoroughness, and, the economic impact analysis is lacking, some projected data as to, what things may cost down the road. And given all the conversations that we're hearing about property taxes and education, I do think there should be a thorough analysis on it.
Do you think the House knew what they were doing?
Objecting to the impact, yes.
I mean, again, because, correct me if I'm wrong, the unintended consequence is your biggest fear, which is all of a sudden, correct me, but maybe Mr. Chapman, you could help me with this. As I understand it, the unintended consequence could be that if there's an objection to the rule, it goes down to the EPA standard, which is more stringent, which makes more districts less.
If there's an objection to the impact analysis.
Yeah.
The agency has 14 days to cure it.
Okay,
I've never seen an agency not cure an impact analysis. I think the agency will be able to do that in a satisfactory manner for LCAR. If there's going to be an objection to the substance of the rule, and specifically the school action level, that's where you have a problem.
right,
The House committee is not objecting to
Okay.
that.
okay,
They have not
Got it.
objected to that. They had a discussion about it, about whether or not they thought that the level was supported by science, but they basically landed on that they're not a scientific committee, that
Right.
they didn't have the basis for objecting to that, that the state toxicologist set those standards, or at least initially set those standards. And that the school action levels are based on the science of the state. They might not like the action levels, they
Right.
might not like how they're being applied, but they did not object to the state action
That's
levels.
helpful. Mr. Chapman, do you mind joining us and
Not at all.
chatting a little bit? We can ask questions of both. Sure. And I don't know, Mr. Chapman, if you want to say anything in relation to the conversation you've heard.
Well, so for the record, Matt Chan, I'm the division director with Waste Management and Prevention Division within A&R. So not disagreeing with Mike at all on anything. I think he basically summarized both what would happen and frankly, the scope of what I would say when I get up here, which is if there was an objection and if the rule didn't move forward, the effect of that is there's a default provision within the I rule that takes the standards and apply what are called the US EPA regional screening values. And the regional screening value for PCBs in indoor air, 5 nanograms per meter cubed. So it's significantly lower and more conservative than the proposed school action levels.
Okay, so we understand, so more stringent.
More strict.
Okay. The air quality, say that part again, just want to make sure we're all.
So the basically the standard would default to what are called the regional screening levels. And the RSL for indoor air for PCBs is 5 nanograms per meter cubed. So it's for the school action levels, they're 30, 60, and 100, depending on the group of people who are exposed.
The EPA is the 5, please, correct.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the timeline. So if LCAR rejects the proposed rule, A&R will have have 14 days to remedy it.
So LCAR has 7 reasons that they can object to a rule. And when they object to a rule, the agency has 14 days to respond to that objection. And at that point, if the agency doesn't fix or respond to the objection in a way that's satisfactory to LCAR can vote to finalize that objection, which they just did for a rule not too long ago, that they on fish and wildlife and trapping. So once they object to a rule, the agency bears the burden, if there's litigation, of defending that aspect of the rule that has been objected to. So here, for an economic impact analysis, I would have to check with Anthea as the expert for LCAR about how that would be litigated. But there would be a potential to argue that the rule was objectionable because of the impact analysis, economic impact analysis. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the agency's gonna respond. Again, it doesn't have to be the most, scientific or the most qualified economist that's doing the analysis. It has to be information that's available and instructive for the purposes of.
And just a quick follow-up on that, sorry, so, and the reason I'm asking is because, if that 14-day window is created, I just want to make sure that it's not an impossible task to get a more thorough impact analysis, and that.
So I'll go ahead and respond to this one. So I have not had the benefit of seeing the objection letter from House Education Committee yet. And I guess I would say, my reaction is I went back and I looked at a number of administrative rules that the agency has adopted through the years and the economic impact statements associated with those rules, including the rule that sets standards for PFASs. And in each one of those, the economic impact analysis that the agency provided is not materially dissimilar from the impact analysis that's here. So I appreciate the concern raised by the committee. I think that LCAR and other committees should be aware that this may have a chilling effect on the ability of administrative agencies to adopt protective standards for human health and environmental protection. That's, it's I think a question of what is the standard that LCAR uses to review economic impacts analyses. It's not clear to me based on their rules what that is.
Well, I have to respond to that
Please.
by looking at the wake vote rule and the analysis that was in the wake vote rule, which is by the same agency, and the entire analysis from impact analysis to scientific analysis was significant. The agency put in significant resources in providing the analysis, both economic and scientific, into the basis of the wake vote rule. Whether or not people agree with that, I'm sure you're going to hear about that. But
So,
it's very dissimilar to what is in this rule.
fair enough. I mean, I guess I would just say there's a wide degree of variability in the economic impact analyses that go before LCAR.
I agree, but this is the economic impact analysis that is specific to schools and the specific cost to schools. Again, it doesn't have to be this.
As thorough
Right.
as the wake
Right.
vote.
So,
But just may I ask, what
just
happens-
to be clear, and we are gonna respond to as soon as I have the benefit of seeing the letter, I wanna see it so that we can be fully responsive and address House Education's concerns. But we have the benefit of more information, more data from schools. We've gone through, and I think you've seen the analysis that Secretary Moore provided with respect to trying to estimate what the potential costs were through the end of 2020, fiscal year 2025. we're taking those numbers and basically trying to analyze what they would be going through the life of the program. So all schools are completed. That's probably going to be a high end estimate for what the cost would be. But we're going to provide that. And I think actually we're going to provide that to LCAR in advance of their meeting next week so that they have the benefit of looking at it before they have to think about objections.
So if that's done, so what if somebody copies and pastes what the impact on schools paragraph, adds a few lines? It goes in, that's the response from the agency. No one else, is there a possibility if House Ed or if this committee is then like, well, still we want more, or just help me with the process a little bit? Or is it kind of, okay, done?
So it could be done.
Uh-huh.
It could be done at that point. Elkhart could say, we accept the revised impact analysis. Or it could say, it could follow what the standard is for objections. So when there's objection made that is not withdrawn after the agency responds, LCAR may file the objection in a certified form with the Secretary of State. The Secretary affixes it to every rule and every publication of the rule so people know that it's been objected to. After a committee objection is filed, to the extent the objection covers a rule or portion of a rule, the burden of proof thereafter shall be on the agency in any action for judicial rule review or for enforcement. So this wouldn't be necessarily an objection to the rule or a portion of the rule. What it would be anyone that was going to challenge the rule would have on the record LCAR's objection to the impact analysis on schools. It might lend to an argument that the rule is arbitrary. So that's really what this would give a little bit of foothold for somebody to challenge the rule and specifically the school action levels and their impact on schools.
And then, just so I know, who is the final decider? Does it go to the environmental court? Does it keep going back to LCAR to decide?
No, once it's done with LCAR review, the agency has a choice. They can file the rule with the objection and it has that legal effect that I just summarized, or they cannot file it. They don't have to file a rule after it's been objected to. Here, I think they would file the rule because there's more in the rule than just the school action levels.
Or redact the objectionable components to the rule.
Senator Sheen,
Sorry if we already covered this, but when LCAR objects, do they just say, we don't like this, please fix it? Or do they provide some sort of guidance as to, please hit these multiple points? This is what we want to see in the impact
The
analysis.
objections are and more specifically recently are very detailed. It's about this language does not meet the legislative intent, or this language is contrary to statutory authority, or this language is arbitrary because. And then the agency has an opportunity to respond. And they don't need to respond. The Fish and Wildlife Board had 4 or 5 objections filed against their last rule, and they said we're not responding.
Senator Williams.
No, after the objected, they had 14 days to do what? Set policy?
They have 14 days to develop a response to the objection.
So what could that response be? Financial or, how we're gonna fix this?
So for this proposed objection, they would come back with a new economic impact analysis that would attempt to satisfy or address the House Committee's concerns.
Who's on LCAR with you?
Senator Williams.
Yeah, Senator Lyons,
Right.
Carol Bodie,
Spring,
School, Trevor School,
Gray,
Bray. Senator Bray. KP, Mark KP.
Modern arts.
Yeah, Senator. To your point, there were objections that the Fish and Wildlife responded to, but if we just kind of got into this loop and then they finally said enough's enough, they stopped responding. They did try.
Right, they did initially respond, yes, yeah, and then there was a further, right, understood.
So can I
yeah, please,
like this?
yeah, no, I appreciate this.
Just clarify one thing. I'm a little confused again about EPA versus state. I don't know, we've been talking about this for a year. And what I understood was the EPA standards were less stringent than Vermont standards.
I think the real question is, what EPA standard are you referring?
Well, I don't know.
No.
The EPA's are.
There are multiple EPA standards, and depending on what media you're speaking to and what type of standard you're looking
Yeah,
at.
but it just kind of turns that whole thing on its head.
Yeah.
You know, so, yeah, I know you're being very specific and you're being very specific for a reason, but it throws the whole thing upside down. I'm not really sure. We even sent a letter in regards to EPA standards versus Vermont standards to a federal delegation. Maybe not knowing enough to know that we're not talking about the right standard. I don't know. So I'm a little confused. And
That
any
would be,
clear.
What's that, Jim?
That's different.
So for, in layperson speak, the air quality versus material.
So this the RSLs, what we are using as the default in the I rule are basically a set of screening values that are used in, I'm gonna use EPA terms, and then I'll unpack it if you want me to, but it's basically CERCLA, which is the Superfund program that EPA administers, which is the sort of equivalent of the program, the science program that this PCB testing program is housed in. So we sort of use those sort of values from our sister program as a analog when we are dealing with, our program. So if you're dealing with TSCA, another EPA program that deals with PCBs, they have a different set of values based on different sort of assumptions that are older and have not been as updated as the CERCLA values have been, if that's helpful.
But so when initially, when we were talking about PCB levels, it was the number 600 kept coming up. That's not referring to air, correct?
I'll be honest, I don't know where the
Okay.
600 number
Okay.
is from.
Okay,
And I need to check with Trish and folks from staff.
all right.
It wasn't 60, was it?
No, it's 600.
Okay.
I don't remember the distinction of air because, see, we're not, it wasn't about eating PCBs and touching PCBs. It's about being in the environment where it's off gas.
But that's how you test for it, and so when you test the screening action level, what the school action level is gonna be is about off gassing. And that's the level that they're testing, they're not, I assume you're not
I always
testing
thought-
soil until you've gotten certain positive effects.
No, we're testing ambient air,
Right.
well, indoor air
Right.
within a school building.
Right, so it's not the soil action
No, I
level.
know, that's what I'm saying is,
Or it's not the material action level, it's the
right, but I thought that's always what we were talking about for the past year. We were talking about air testing in schools, not, it was all about air testing.
at Burlington High School, I think it was multiple, right? It was not just air, there was soil and there were materials.
Correct. So they're both at Burlington High School. There were samples done in building materials, indoor air, and in soils, and there are different values for what you use for cleanup in all three of those different media types.
Again, what I'm finding confusing is that EPA standards versus Vermont standards, soil, air, water. The impression, which was deeply impressed in this was, the EPA was less stringent. That's the confusing part.
But EPA is less stringent under TSCA not under CERCLA. And the standard that is being used is the default standard in the I rule is CERCLA.
I mean, it- I mean, it-
But
yeah.
That's what it
Here,
was.
just
Yeah.
look at this, just look at this term, thanks. That's where we're getting.
Just because we'll have to respond to some of our colleagues as well, I'm curious, just what the House did, is it possible that in some way, an unintended consequence would completely, again, push the EPA rule to be more stringent, as well as negatively impact the rollout of this bill so that homes and families, because I know it's more than just schools, are in some, is more, in a more serious situation than they are now.
I do not think that what the House letter
This, yeah,
will do is going to lead to an objection to the school action level. LCAR on its own
could,
from input from others,
yeah,
but the committee's letter is not about the school action level. I'm
Right.
objecting to that. It's about the economic impact analysis.
Mr. Chapman, anything on that? Sorry, Senator, do you have a
All right, I'm just.
Because of trouble.
Is that chart, are we measuring the same
Sorry.
thing?
Let me orient myself
Orient.
here and
Orient
see
away.
what it is.
Because that, I can tell you that table caused a big kerfuffle in Burlington.
Okay,
Because of that 600 level for the high school students, when we were tested at 100 and 300, but we're told we had to leave because the state levels were so much lower.
Oh, this is the 600. This is where it ends.
so not being engaged in all of EPA's sort of variance PCB standards, if you don't mind me talking to Trish and Dr. Owen
Yeah, no, I
about,
don't mind it.
and happy to get
Yeah,
back.
I didn't mean to put you on. the spot.
Oh, no, I don't mind, but it just looking at it again, sort of, I have not personally seen this table and would want to give you an inaccurate answer. So,
Great.
So may I ask Mr. Chapman, you need to go. Okay. Thanks, Mike. We appreciate it and we'll likely have you back to continue this conversation a little bit if the committee wants to pick it up and kind of follow maybe the direction or not of the House. But did you object to what the House did? Did they have you in? Was there a conversation about their letter?
have they approved their letter?
I don't remember there was.
It's been sent to LCAR. I know.
Okay, I haven't seen it.
I know they had Trish in on like the 16th or the 17th.
They did, but I don't believe that they talked about this issue. So, so I haven't had the benefit of reading the House's letter or having a full appreciation as to why they objected. I mean, I certainly got a sense of it in Secretary Moore's testimony of just sort of the conversation back and forth. And I guess notwithstanding sort of my respectful disagreement with Mr. O'Grady about what the standard is for economic impact analysis, we're gonna go ahead and provide an updated economic impact analysis to help cover. I mean, I'm not trying to just disregard things.
So, manage census.
Yeah.
So whether we write a letter or not, you're gonna provide the economic impact update.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we've gone through and we've done some additional, we've basically taken the set of assumptions that we used to provide the data that you saw in the memoranda that Secretary Moore gave to you.
Yeah.
And then just sort of ran it out. I think that that's gonna give a number that is bigger than what we're likely to see, but it will be what it is. I mean, one of the things, I think the other thing, and it's probably important to note, that the economic impact analysis requires, or at least a brief discussion of what a no rule alternative is. And in this particular case, it would be a much lower standard and higher cost associated with cleanup of more schools needing to do work. So that's sort of the flip side of the coin with respect to this.
Sergio.
I really appreciate that, and I would prefer you go higher rather than lower, because one of the things we saw in our school construction aid task force is that And this was, I mean, we heard it over and over and over again, the estimates that were done by the state with, like, we understand why, but they were way lower when what the schools did their own analysis came out much higher. And it makes sense. They were only in there for a day, sometimes not even a day, sometimes it's a couple of hours. So I just want to make sure that we get a kind of a realistic picture.
Sure. I mean, I think
I may just ask, Senator, just to be clear, so it's the school was testing and the state, is that was?
Well, some schools have done a facilities analysis of their infrastructure, of their buildings, because they wanted to renovate and they found that their analysis was like sometimes double what the state came up with
Okay.
in that big report that we haven't really dug into yet, but so generally, those seem to be low.
It's better than not saying anything.
for clarity, just because again, I haven't been following the school construction task force, is the estimate, an estimate of costs that they think are low? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's cost, I'm sorry, so it's cost that they think is low,
Okay.
right, it's not,
And sorry, this isn't even tied to PCBs, this was just school.
School construction cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is we're using the actuals from the projects that have already gone through the process and received cost estimates, and then just sort of expanding it out and saying, okay, if the future looks like the present, this is what we would expect to see. And that's admittedly an imperfect tool, but it's what we have, and I think, you know, to reflect, right, I think we would all love to have access to robust economic analysis resources. We don't, in the executive branch, we don't have them, right? Like, so the same person who is the environmental analyst, who's an expert in PCB remediation, has to estimate the economic impacts associated with this, to the best of their ability.
you might have Senator Flanshaw? Yeah, and then Senator.
So do you think it would be helpful if we could get with the House Education Committee, find out why they objected?
I think, so they objected because, and correct me if I'm wrong, and all of you that heard as well, they're just concerned that in that paragraph, they felt it was left too loose in terms of cost analysis. I think they said something like, this could be really expensive
For schools.
for schools, yeah. And I think the House would have preferred a more detailed analysis and explanation of the costs. Yeah. Senator.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, I've made my opinions very clear on this, but I would just reiterate that, I am in support of the House letter, and one of the reasons why is, for example, North Country High School, when they looked at, the amount of money that they've spent on PCB testing and remediation, which I think is upwards of $500,000 now. And it's on a part of the school that they were really hoping to tear down. So that's why I keep saying, if we could somehow do this in concert with our school construction plan, which has yet to be fully developed, but I mean, that would just make so much sense financially, every other way.
Sure, and I mean, I guess, and maybe it didn't come through when Secretary Moore came through and gave a presentation to the committee, but one of the things that we want to do in sort of the retooling of the program is to give schools like North Country additional time before they need to deal with the PCP issue. So if they have, say, a 5-year plan to do construction on that portion of the school, that we could find a way to mitigate harm to students so that there's not an unreasonable exposure, work with EPA to deal with EPA related issues associated with this, and then allow the PCB remediation to get folded in. I think the goals are shared, and we're trying to retool the program now that we're seeing these things to build that type of approach into the program as we move forward.
That's awesome. And then just keeping in mind that complexity, both resource wise, staff wise, financially of the mitigation, which is sometimes also problematic, but
Sure.
I know we've said that before.
Does, are you good? Good, you're, do we always ask for in all of these rules, the economic impact? And the only reason I'm wondering is because you think sometimes the economic impact is gonna be what it's thinking PFAS. Economic impact for sure. I don't know how much that's driven by that impact, these kinds of decisions. Does that make sense?
This is the first, I've worked at the Agency of Natural Resources for over 20 years and in various capacities. in my capacity, I used to be a lawyer and I've worked on a lot of rulemaking. This is the first time in 20 years I've seen the economic impact analysis be an issue by a committee or an element. And again, I flag it, but I don't have any problem. I don't have any problem updating. We have
Yeah,
to
that's what it
be able to
sounds
do
like.
it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it is very atypical.
Yeah, please.
What's our time? We're doing.
Yeah, we've got another couple minutes.
Just to follow up on that statement, is the testing and remediation / mitigation processes for PFAS as sort of complicated and uncertain as for PCBs? Because I mean, I've heard, again, anecdotally, so many stories about both the testing and the remediation being kind of not an exact science,
For both.
just for
Both
PCBs. I'm just
PCBs,
talking
yeah,
PCBs.
yeah.
No, I think it's fair. I mean, I think that, in many ways, PFAS poses the same set of challenges, and in some ways, maybe even more challenges than PCBs do. PCBs thankfully are out of commerce and they're not any longer used.
Right.
PFASs are still used in a lot of commercial
Yes.
products, so we're still trying to get a grapple on, for lack of a better word, turning the faucet off from filling the tub, right, as opposed to just dealing with the water in the tub. So
Okay.
and they're both complicated, they both, you know, I think the easy comparison for me is like lead in schools and looking at taps and faucets. It's a really straightforward, easy process to go through. Things like indoor air issues or groundwater related issues get much more complicated in trying to find a source and then sort of fix the problem in a sort of confined way.
Yeah.
So
Anything else? Thanks for coming in.
thank you.
Really appreciate
All
it.
good.
Yeah. So, committee, we have some time before Dustin James comes in to talk about bills. So I wanted to just take a minute, a little time, to sort of review where we're at, some of what I think are our priorities, recognizing that things can change. And also setting the table a little bit for what the House is gonna be working on and what we're gonna be working on. And also start to get maybe some conclusion and some direction on a few things. So without a doubt, literacy, CTEs, getting some more clarification on the 22, I'm talking what I'm seeing as our priorities right now, 2200 series. Looking at, I'd say, continue our conversation with PCBs, although the House is gonna take the lead on a school construction work that they'll send to us. But I'm thinking before crossover. And I think there's some general conversation out there, correct me if I'm wrong, around makeup of the state board, the makeup of some of the boards of our state colleges that maybe have. Those are some of the things that I'm seeing right now rising to the top. One of the things we've talked about a lot, put a good amount of time in, is Holocaust education. And I'm not sure if anybody needs to hear from anybody else, if people need some more time on that question. I think I'm starting to feel like moving in a certain direction, but you know, there's just one person. So I'm wondering if anybody wants to say anything about Holocaust education at this point, where they're at, where they might need some more information, things they support, concerns, anything like that right now. Senator Hewitt?
Only that this process has really made me think more about curriculum
Yeah.
or curricula, as it were, in the state of Vermont, and who gets to decide and how we deploy it across the state or don't, and what priorities are. So for me, I can envision a time when we look at it in a bigger, a broader scope.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there are some really important issues, Holocaust education being one of them, that seems to maybe not be as robust as we would like it to be. But yet there isn't a clear process for us to define curriculum.
I'm with you. Yeah, that sort of, that it's sort of raising to me, the top of this issue out there for sure.
Do you want to do the?
Mr. Bloomer? Me too.
Yeah, I had a quick
I'm
question.
very competent. In fact, she's
I didn't-
she's basically
In
trying to,
fact, she'd be perfect right now.
she's perfect. You're up, you're up.
Come on.
It will be less than 30 seconds.
What is it? You have the bridge?
She has a.
Sure.
She has a comment.
He's a what?
Oh.
Power is what I got. Power. So anyway, so any other thoughts on cost distribution? That's what we were talking about.
I think your point about curriculum is important because starting to see a lot of fighting over school choice and, putting the following student, and it goes back to the Equity in Education Act that basically everybody was supposed to be the same, cookie cutter. And I think we've gotten away from that, Act 68. So
Yeah.
I think it's important that, who sets the policy? Is it every school for itself, his or herself?
Well, we have standards, we've talked about that, we have EQS, but it just, I don't know, seems that some things may fall through the cracks.
So I agree with both of you that we don't understand the pressures on curriculum management. And until we do, it's hard to mandate X number of hours for any specific topic, regardless of its importance, relevance.
Thanks. Sitting also here and thinking about all of us, whether we're all here together next year, there's a different committee, whatever. I wonder if we would be really, again, setting, and I know we've done some of this in schools, but really setting more of a precedence around this committee doing curriculum. And I do worry that next year, and I'm not saying we should do something on this issue, but if we were to have 55 bills next year that say, I want calculus, I want this, I want that, again, those things, a different kind of importance. I do worry that this becomes that curricula committee, and I don't have the expertise. I think we have one public school, high school teacher here. We have a range of different experiences. I'm just saying, I'm not sure this is the committee where we want to be doing this kind of work every year.
I'd like to see the agency doing more. And then if there's an argument, then it comes here and we get involved in it, but that's a good point. I don't want to become the curriculum committee.
To your point, I mean, one thing we've heard about the Agency of Education, and we have yet to really dive into this, but we keep hearing that they are under-resourced, and so it does seem as though when there are issues or problems, what is their capacity to enforce these, or support, enforce or support, right?
Mhm.
There are 159 employees.
But it's a huge job. It's a very complicated, educating people is complicated. It's not simple. And it's a huge workforce and look at the amount of infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. That seems like the minimum you should have. The IT department, what did we hear?
350.
350 and they make more money. So, let's just, a number is a number, but unless you understand what it means, it's kind of meaningless. So anyway, I put it off my.
But it's a really good point about enforcement, because that's something that might, again, it's not happening out there on some of these issues. I don't want to drop it we're not going to drop it because we have the ethnic studies coming in on Friday. So we're going to continue the conversation at 2:00 on Friday. And then I think we also have to understand from their perspective why this is not part of their report. And then we have to ask ourselves whether or not we want to act legislatively, or we want to give some direction to the agency, or what we might want to do. Senator Hashi, pensive.
No, I think a good point, because I'm kind of going back and forth on the on something you described earlier, which is, you know, are we going to become the curriculum committee? And, you know, are we gonna then spend hours talking about what types of calculus will be in the classroom? But I do still feel like something needs to happen to make sure that this is being taught in schools. I think I'm pretty sure we're all on the same page that it's a no-brainer that Holocaust education should be happening in our schools. But how we go about making sure that it actually is being taught in schools, and how we enforce that. I think that's the conversation that we should be having, and like you just said, trying to figure out, you know, where do we push or suggest to make sure that it is indeed happening in schools. Yeah, maybe there's a rule change that needs to happen. No.
And then back to what Senator Buick said when she introduced her literacy bill. Literacy really is the root of a lot of these things, you know, civic ed, how we understand differences, I mean, literacy is so key. I'm not saying it's taking the place. It's just a key component to how we understand world and society, center weeks.
I think that possibly we could get advice on how to approach the issue of adding or supporting particular curriculum without being curriculum managers. I mean, what are the other tools we have in our toolbox? Can we, you know, the rule or the agency, or, I mean, there must be some other way other than writing law that said you must do this, because I think everybody kept coming back to the precedent. There is a precedent, there's
Yeah.
one topic, and I don't remember.
Health and smoking.
Okay, so there's one. So when there's one, there's two. When there's two, there's four. When there's four, there's eight.
Were there more?
Well, there was one that was easily identified, but I think, was it Beth who was talking us through that? She did say there may be others, but we haven't taken a deep dive.
Right.
So, because
Okay.
Title
But
16
it's
is long.
limited. My point is it's limited, and what other, my real point is what are the tools we have to encourage this education without mandating it via legislation? That's all.
Yeah, and just to follow up to that, I think, you know, just as a reminder, you know, we did try something last year regarding Act One and the working group. And my understanding is we didn't really get a report that includes a suggestion that Holocaust education be required in schools. And if I'm incorrect on that, totally have to stand corrected, but is that accurate? So I think that as we're exploring whatever it is we can do, keep in mind that we did try one thing last year that hasn't really gotten us anywhere. So, you know, I hope that I'm sure that we'll be sort of, yeah. Don't want to do that.
So we'll hear from the Act One folks on Friday, and I'll ask Beth to come in. I think she'd be the best person to help us, how do we support curriculum without being curriculum managers? What sorts of tools do we have at our disposal? Okay. Please.
If you were looking for other topics,
Yeah, I mean, I want to go through these, but go ahead, yeah.
I just wanted to offer, because we've already hit it, just really started, budget impact, you know, there's annual school budgets, they're in process right now. You know, any mitigation, any support we can give, and not to let up on BTSU for vision. Where's BTS? Not saying we're gonna legislate anything, but keep bringing it back in here. Where are you going? What are you doing? What's your vision? You know, from the chancellor to the president, and just keep thinking that.
Both great points, and we do have not trying to punt it, but it's good that we have a Thursday conversation with House Ed, Senate Finance, and Ways and Means about this, so.
Yeah, that budget.
On the budget thing.
Yeah.
And then BTSU, I'll continue to look to folks for, we'll continue to have conversations with them. I mean, the one thing that's, you know, listen, I appreciate the bill on the chancellor. happy to have that conversation, happy to, continue that conversation. One of the things that I think there might be some real, I don't know, an opinion coalescing around is whether or not faculty and staff should be on that board. I mean, I think I could be wrong reading all four of you saying, all right, maybe that's something that one part of it could be a little bit of settled science.
I mean, priority
yeah.
for me is, my bill on the state board, the appointment of
Yeah.
state board of education members. And that bill was co-sponsored by Senator Baruch as well as Senator Schultz.
Right, and we mentioned that.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. So we had two things.
I didn't hear it, I'm sorry.
We had two, and even though Senator Booth sponsored it, we still might take it.
Okay.
Hopefully that's correct.
Oh,
Yeah, no, I think the two things around boards and commissions, that and the state colleges, rethinking that board, who's on the state board as well as who is sitting at the board of trustees with the state colleges. So then the other thing, let's just talk about literacy for a minute.
Yeah.
So the agency has a literacy bill, you have a literacy bill, Bobby has a literacy bill. We have some library things. Are you comfortable with a big committee bill on literacy?
I am, I'm not sure Bobby's bill is a literacy bill.
Yeah, I mean, we could always.
But-
Barbie.
Senator Starr,
Yeah.
sorry. I'm fine with whatever I'm fine with doing something bold with literacy.
Okay.
I do think the screening seems like a very sort of a niche, right? So when will we get to look at the agencies? Cause it's,
tomorrow.
that's kind of important.
I
just
believe
to
it's tomorrow.
see if there's. So the two go together or not.
So let me just take a quick look here. Sorry. No. I don't see it, so let's make sure, Morgan, do we have the AP's literacy bill this week? Oh, actually, I'm looking at last week's. I think you have it somewhere.
We have the agency coming in on the Rule Series 2200.
Can you get them in on S? Let's see. We have everything up here that we need. So here it is. We should have all these in by the end of this week. So we should have heard from everybody. So S281 this week. Anything else? Yeah,
So
let me see what I've left on.
I'm thinking, you know,
And again, this can change, of course. I just want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page.
education funding. I've heard a lot of squawking about 15.5%. If you make some assumptions, there could be some school budgets that don't get passed multiple times. Is that gonna put us in a tailspin on what we need to work on? Maybe it'll set different priorities, or doesn't really affect us. What we're
It's
doing.
a good question though.
So say that again. So in terms of the budget,
The budget,
the school board budgets.
so hypothetically,
Yeah.
say several districts can't pass their,
Oh,
and it's after town meeting day, everyone's had a opportunity to at least react to it. Do we have a role? Is there a review role?
it's a great question. I would definitely ask it Thursday. We should have a real conversation about it when we have the joint hearing. It's a great question.
ideally it won't, they'll all pass, but. You know, in our district, we had one supervisor, even district that, they failed 4 times last year.
And when was it passed finally?
We'll ask them, they're appearing up there, so.
Okay.
And they're concerned about it too.
Yeah.
Cause I mean, I don't know if they can cut it more.
Yeah, no, we've heard from school boards and Jeff Francis and people that have been around for a while think this could be, get a lot of those. Robert, no votes.
I really appreciate you saying that, because it's a needs issue, so.
They'd be the bearer of bad news all the time.
No, but I mean, you also express your support, which is great.
Okay, so, and then,
Where is Missy Cheese?
she's coming at 3:30.
Oh.
Yeah, we know she's, yeah, so we took this time just to make sure, so. Again, Holocaust Education, Act One later this week. The budget impact, we have a public hearing or a hearing. CTEs, we're going through and starting a little bit, tomorrow, BTSU. State board and, state college boards, literacy. Those are the big, and, do you have this, bill on cell phones?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, it's gonna
So-
be this week.
so we'll have cell phones also, a walkthrough on that issue. So we'll put that under,
No,
put
that's-
under classroom,
What kind of device?
etiquette, classroom, yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah,
And
go for it.
I do have two bills that aren't as vast as dealing with issues like budget, but the refugee bill
Yeah.
and the bill for, deaf and hard hearing, Bill of Rights.
And I think they're both this week.
Gotta get a little more scheduling with the deaf part.
Okay.
But yeah.
It's February next week. That's why I just want to make sure we are moving this. Yeah.
Wow,
Professionalize this
right?
legislature.
Yes.
Curiosity question.
Please.
Who looks at organizational effectiveness at administrative agencies? In other words, 159 compared to 350 in IT.
Oh, yeah, that's something that I've been really, and I should put it also on this, the AOE sort of
Right.
reboot or take a look in some way, we'll have a miscellaneous education bill. Can we have that kind of review of that agency?
Well, who
Who
normally,
would we do it?
is there like a human resources agency that would look at, if state government isn't operating because of an imbalance in personnel or
Yeah.
funding, then the whole process is skewed.
It's a great question, and it's a real issue. Historically, and I don't remember if we talked about it last year or the year before, we got an estimate for what it would cost to assess the agency, and it came back pretty pricey. Outside group, I think joint fiscal said you're talking about $150,000. But it might,
For a $3 billion budget.
but might be
That's
worth
pretty
it.
good.
Yeah,
Take that.
Yeah.
How can you?
Because the budget won't pass until when? May?
Yeah.
Probably.
I hope so.
I did just want to bring up, today in health and welfare, we took testimony from DCF about the fact that we didn't submit the form for summer meals.
Yeah, we have that coming up in ag
Okay,
too.
I don't know if we want to talk about it in here, but it was interesting to hear from them, because
Well, we already heard from last week. Remember they said that they had the statistics of, you're talking about the school meal program? Oh, okay.
we were written up in the New York Times, I think. Yeah,
Are you referring to, was it the $15 million?
Yeah.
That,
we didn't, so,
well, that wasn't us, that was governor, correct? Who declined the 15 million.
well, that's what we were trying to get at in health and welfare today, is what happened? Why didn't we get the money? It seems like really, really important, a really important, application that should have been submitted, et cetera, and I think we should hear from them again, because there was a little bit of confusion between what AHS or DCF was supposed to do and what the AOE was supposed to do, and it would.
Oh, including AOE? Is it
I
AOE?
think
Okay,
so, yes. I mean, yes, we should hear from AOE because
okay.
it was unclear what happened, to me anyway, it was unclear.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we put it on the agenda for next week. This week's pretty tight, but
Yeah.
unless you want to make it a priority,
No.
we could find 20 minutes,
No,
but, absolutely.
We're talking about sleeping bags earlier.
Yeah.
I got plenty of.
See, the three of us are in the same committee, so.
Yeah. Amen. Excellent. All right. I understand these will change, just felt like, let's just make sure we're all on the same page. We've got miscellaneous ed bills. I think we can hopefully move literacy, exposure on Holocaust ed, one way or the other, sooner rather than later. And there was something else that I thought could be sooner rather than later. That may be it, but then everything else we can on pretty quickly. Great, all right. So Ms. St. James will be here in 10 minutes, so let's take a 10-minute break, all right? And then Senator Kulik is up, and then I'm